The first time my mother demanded my penthouse, she smiled while doing it. The second time, she threatened to disown me. And by the end of my brother's wedding reception, my grandfather stood up in front of 200 guests and revealed a truth so brutal, nobody in that ballroom could even look at my parents afterward. Not even my brother. My name is Victoria Hale. I'm 33 years old, and for most of my life, I believed my worth depended on what I could provide for my family. Money. Connections. Solutions. I was the responsible child. My younger brother, Daniel, was the adored one. Funny how that works. The dependable child becomes useful. The reckless child becomes loved. Daniel was charming, impulsive, magnetic. He bounced between business ideas every 6 months, and somehow my parents always treated him like a misunderstood genius. Meanwhile, I worked non-stop. Scholarships. Graduate school. Corporate law. 70-hour workweeks. I built my life from the ground up because I learned early that nobody was coming to save me. Especially not my parents. Still, I kept trying to earn their approval. Every promotion, every achievement, every sacrifice felt like another audition for love. And every time, the applause went to Daniel anyway. When I bought my penthouse at 31, it was the proudest moment of my life. 42 floors above downtown Chicago. Floor-to-ceiling windows. A skyline view I used to dream about while studying in tiny apartments with broken heaters. I paid for it myself. Every cent. No family money. No trust fund. Mine. But the second my parents saw it, something changed in their eyes. Not pride. Calculation. I noticed it immediately. My mother walked through the living room slowly, touching marble countertops like she already owned them. "This place is extraordinary," she whispered. Dad asked about the property value before congratulating me. Daniel joked, "Guess we know who the rich sibling is now." Everyone laughed. I didn't. Because something about the way they looked around made me uncomfortable. Then Daniel got engaged 6 months later. And suddenly my penthouse became the center of every conversation. At first, it sounded harmless. Oh, the rehearsal dinner would look beautiful here. Then, maybe the bridal party can stay here. Then eventually, you should let Daniel and Sophie move in after the wedding. I genuinely thought my mother was kidding. You mean temporarily? She blinked at me. Well, newlyweds need stability. I stared at her. They can rent an apartment. Dad sighed immediately like I was being difficult. Victoria, family helps family. That sentence again. Family helps family. Funny how that phrase only appeared when they wanted something from me. I tried staying calm. Daniel has a job. A startup, Mom snapped. Which means unpredictable income. Daniel rolled his eyes dramatically. Relax, Vic. It's not like you need 5 bedrooms. Something inside me hardened. Because nobody asked. They assumed. Like my success automatically belonged to the family the second it became impressive enough. I'm not giving anyone my home, I said firmly. The room went cold instantly. Mom's smile disappeared. Dad leaned back slowly. And Daniel muttered. Wow. That one word carried years of resentment. Over the next month, the pressure escalated non-stop. Phone calls. Guilt trips. Passive-aggressive comments. My mother started telling relatives I was becoming selfish. Apparently spending a decade sacrificing my 20s to build a career only counted until I stopped handing people pieces of it. Then came the first twist. 3 weeks before the wedding, my grandfather called me unexpectedly. My grandfather, Arthur, rarely involved himself in family drama. He was 82, sharp as a blade, and terrifyingly observant. "Victoria," he said quietly, "come visit me." When I arrived, he asked one question immediately. "Why is your father trying to access your property records?" I froze. What? Turns out my father contacted one of grandfather's longtime real estate associates asking about ownership transfer procedures. Ownership transfer. My stomach dropped. They think they can pressure you into signing it over, grandfather said calmly. I felt physically sick. They actually planned this? He looked at me for a long moment. They've been planning it for months. Then he handed me copies of emails. My hands shook reading them. My parents weren't discussing temporary housing. They were discussing permanently keeping the penthouse in the family. One email from my mother actually said, Victoria cares too much about work to settle down anyway. The apartment would serve Daniel better long term. I couldn't breathe. Not because of the property. Because I realized my family genuinely believed my life mattered less than my brother's comfort. That night I cried harder than I had in years. And the worst part? A small piece of me still wanted them to love me afterward. The wedding weekend arrived tense and miserable. Every interaction felt loaded. At rehearsal dinner, my mother loudly told relatives. Some people value property more than family. Everyone knew she meant me. Daniel barely spoke to me. His fiancée Sophie looked increasingly uncomfortable, like she sensed something ugly beneath the surface but didn't fully understand it yet. Then came twist number 2. The morning of the wedding, Sophie knocked on my hotel room door alone. She looked pale. Victoria, she whispered, I need to ask you something. My chest tightened immediately. Apparently, Daniel promised her they'd be moving into my penthouse after the honeymoon. Not asking. Promised. As if it was already decided. I stared at her in disbelief. He told you that? She nodded slowly. He said your parents already handled everything. I felt pure rage for the first time. Not sadness. Not disappointment. Rage. Because they weren't just manipulating me anymore. They were building entire futures around stealing from me. And Sophie looked horrified once she realized the truth. I thought you agreed, she whispered. No, I said quietly. They never even respected me enough to ask. The wedding ceremony itself felt surreal. Perfect flowers. String quartet. Luxury ballroom. Fake smiles everywhere. I sat through the entire event feeling like an outsider at my own family's performance. Then came the reception. 200 guests. Champagne flowing. Laughter echoing. And right in the middle of dinner, my father stood up holding a microphone. I knew instantly something bad was coming. He tapped his glass smiling broadly. We're so proud of Daniel and Sophie beginning their new life together. Polite applause. Then Dad turned toward me. And thankfully, family takes care of family. Victoria has generously agreed to support the newlyweds as they start this next chapter. My blood ran cold. No. No, no, no. People started clapping automatically because they assumed he meant financially. Then my mother smiled brightly and said into the microphone. They'll be living in Victoria's penthouse after the honeymoon. The room exploded into applause. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. They publicly announced ownership of my home before even telling me. And then everyone started looking at me expectantly. Waiting for confirmation. Humiliation burned through my body so intensely I thought I might faint. Daniel avoided eye contact completely. Because he knew. He knew this was never agreed upon. Then my mother leaned toward me hissing quietly through her smile. Don't embarrass this family tonight. Something inside me finally broke. I stood up slowly. And before I could speak, another voice cut through the ballroom. Actually, my grandfather said calmly, I think the family already embarrassed itself. Silence. Complete silence. Grandfather stood from his table holding a folder. And suddenly my parents looked nervous. Terrified nervous. He walked slowly to the center of the ballroom. Then he looked directly at my father. Tell them the truth. Dad went pale instantly. Arthur. No, grandfather interrupted sharply. You wanted a public conversation. Let's have one. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then grandfather opened the folder. And the final twist detonated like a bomb. 5 years earlier, my parents secretly took out massive loans to cover Daniel's failed business debts. Over $2 million. They mortgaged nearly everything they owned, hiding his financial disasters from the family. And when they couldn't recover financially, they started targeting my penthouse. Not because Daniel needed stability. Because they were drowning. Grandfather revealed emails, bank records, everything. Including one devastating message from my father. If Victoria transfers the property voluntarily, creditors can't touch it. The room erupted instantly. Gasps. Whispers. Sophie looked physically ill. Daniel stood frozen like someone slapped him. And my mother? She burst into tears, screaming that grandfather betrayed the family. But he wasn't finished. Then he revealed the cruelest truth of all. My grandfather had quietly paid off portions of Daniel's debts years earlier under one condition. That my parents stop enabling him and leave my future untouched. Instead, they hid the situation and tried sacrificing me financially to keep Daniel comfortable. Grandfather looked directly at me and said, "You were never supposed to carry this family." I broke instantly. Because nobody had ever said that to me before. Not once in my life. Then Sophie stood up slowly. Took off her wedding ring. And placed it on the table. "I can't marry into this," she whispered. Daniel looked shattered. "Wait." But she walked out. Right there in the middle of the reception. And honestly? Nobody blamed her. The aftermath destroyed everything. Daniel spiraled after Sophie left. My parents became social pariahs almost overnight after relatives learned the truth. Creditors eventually forced them to sell their home anyway. And the family image they tried so desperately to preserve? Gone. Completely gone. A few weeks later, my mother called crying. "You let your grandfather humiliate us." I listened quietly before answering. "No. You humiliated yourselves the moment you decided my life belonged to Daniel." Then I hung up. For good. Today, I still live in my penthouse. Same skyline. Same windows. But it feels different now. Peaceful. Because for the first time in my life, I stopped trying to earn love from people who only valued what I could give them. And sometimes, late at night, I remember my grandfather standing in that ballroom while the entire room fell silent around him. One old man telling the truth nobody else was brave enough to say. And honestly? That was the first time anyone in my family ever protected me.